Back to verse 25, Romans 3. So God hath set him forth to be a propitiation when we can place our faith in his what? His blood. Now you see, we're living in a sophisticated day when people don't like to talk about sacrificial blood. And we're just not programmed to that, but nevertheless, we cannot ignore the demands of Scripture that God, in his own reasoning, in his own line of thought, has demanded shed blood for the remission of sin, and we can't abrogate that. We can't go against it. All right, so now let's read on. So he's been made a propitiation when we place our faith in his blood. And why do we place faith in his blood? For the remission of sins that are past, and through the forbearance of God, to declare, I say at this time, his righteousness, that he, the Lord Jesus, might be, what's the next word? Just or fair, as well as being the justifier of him who keeps the law, who joins the church, does this or does that, but what? Believeth. See? Oh, people don't like that, but that's what the book said. All right, now let's come back to verse 25 for a minute. And here's another statement I think most people just sort of gloss over because they don't really know what it's talking about. When it says that God declared his righteousness for the remission of sins that are past. Now, what's he talking about? Well, the Old Testament believer. Now, do you remember when I taught the difference a long time ago between hell and the lake of fire? And I pointed out, and I put it on the board, that all through the Old Testament economy, even the believers, with the exception of Enoch and Elijah, when they died, they didn't go to heaven. Where did they go? They went down into paradise. Remember that? I drew the circles on the board, and they went down into paradise, and we get just a little window of information on that between Abraham and Lazarus and the rich man in torment. You remember that? And there was a great gulf fixed that they couldn't cross over. Well, all right, Abraham and Lazarus, of course, were down in that area called Hades or hell, and that explains the creed when it says that Jesus descended into hell, but he went into the paradise side. And then at his resurrection morning, he took paradise to heaven. And so now Paul tells us to be absent from the body is present with the Lord. But in the Old Testament, it wasn't that way. They couldn't go into heaven. God made two exceptions, but on the whole, the believer in the Old Testament could not go into heaven. Why? There had been no atoning bloodshed. The blood of animals and goats couldn't take away their sin. It was a stopgap. I always call it sweeping it under the rug. But once the true atonement had been accomplished, now there was no reason to send people down into paradise. Paradise was taken directly to heaven. All right, now that's exactly what Paul is reminding us. That he's not only talking about the New Testament believer, he's also bringing in the Old Testament saint. His sins were now totally atoned for by virtue of the shed blood of Christ. Brings us right up to date, doesn't it? All right, now then verse 26. To declare, I say at this time, his righteousness. Now what is Paul constantly hammering home, either one way or another? That there's nothing we've got going for us. See? We have nothing good. We have no righteousness. We have nothing to barter. All we can do is, again, like Israel at the Red Sea, is say, I'm helpless. I'm hopeless. There's nothing I can do. But oh, that's when God steps in, see? All right, and so he might be just. Now, I remember some time ago, either hearing or reading, I never remember which, someone presented the same question that I've had in my mind, and I'm sure everyone has. How will God justify sending someone to the eternal lake of fire when, so far as we know, they have never had an opportunity to hear the gospel? The human response is, but God, that's not fair. They never had a chance. Well, whoever the individual was, and if I knew, I'd give credit, but I don't remember. He said, you know, the only way we can answer that dilemma is that God is never unjust. He is never unfair. So in His own higher way of thinking, He knows how He's going to take care of it. There's no way we can comprehend it. But always remember that God can never be unfair. He is totally just in all of His dealings. All right, now you come back again to the text. So, in order for all this to be consummated, the work of propitiation, the work of His shed blood, the work of redemption, as we saw in the last program, He's going to end up being just, and He's also going to be just in justifying, declaring, just as if they had never sinned, any sinner who is a child of Adam who will simply believe in Jesus. Now, of course, when Paul says believe in Jesus, he's not talking about the Jesus of the Gospels. He's talking about the Jesus after His resurrection. The Christ of resurrection. And let's never lose sight of that. So He is the justifier of him who believeth in Jesus. Now again, I'm always reminding you, aren't I? What's left out of there? Well, all the things that the rank and file people think should be in there. But it isn't. There's a lot of things in here that the world says, well, this is what I'd have to do, or when I mean the world, I mean the Christianity. They'll say, but you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and every other thing. It's not in here. All the Bible declares is that these things will be, and we'll be coming to the word imputed, probably in the next chapter. These things are imputed to us when we believe. But when we believe, things are going to start happening. We're going to see some life changes. We're going to see a whole new personality makeup. And that takes care of then of all the problems that these people say, well, you have to do this and you have to do it. No, we don't. Those things are going to come naturally as a result then of our faith. See? All right, verse 27. So where is boasting? Remember I told you in one of the last taping programs, wouldn't heaven be an awful, boring place if you had to stop every 5 seconds and listen to somebody tell you everything that they did to get there? Oh, it'd be awful. And that's what it would be. That's what the next chapter is going to say, that if Abraham would have been saved by works, he could have boasted. And if he'd boast now, he'd still be boasting a jillion years from now. But that's not the way it's going to be, see? But there is going to be no room for boasting. It's excluded. Can't make it any plainer than that. You can't argue with that. It's taken out of the way. By what law? What law says we can't work for our salvation? Is it the law of works? No. But the law of faith. See? Isn't that beautiful? The law of faith without works. Now I know the book of James says faith without works is dead. And I'm not going to get into the controversy. But you see, Paul, on the other hand, says it's faith plus nothing until we're saved. And then what follows? Works, of course. So that we can never come back and say, but I did this for my salvation. We have to totally rest on that which has been done on our behalf. All right, now verse 28. See how often Paul repeats things? And that's by Spirit inspiration, and it's for a reason. And we have to do the same thing. We just have to constantly repeat some of these things in order for them to soak in. Therefore, we conclude. Now, what does that mean? Hey, there's no more room for argument. Forget it. It's all settled. It's done. We conclude that a man is justified. Now, remember the definition. Made just as if we'd never sinned. We are justified by faith. Oh, but what's the next word? Without the deeds of the law. Oh, isn't that fantastic? We are justified by faith. You know, years and years ago, I had a lady in one of my classes, I think it was down at McAllister, and she was a fairly good artist. And one day she came up with a little painting of an odd-looking little character with the most quizzical look on his face that you can imagine. And her caption was, "Faith plus nothing?" Perfect. Because isn't that exactly the general rule of people? When they hear me teach that it's faith plus nothing, they just quizzically look and say, "Now wait a minute, Les, what are you talking about? Don't I have to do this? Don't I have to do that?" No, not for salvation. It is faith plus nothing. I know it may be hard to swallow, but listen, that's what the book teaches. Therefore, we are justified by faith without the law. All right, verse 29, I think we can finish the chapter in the minute we have left. Is he the God of the Jew only? Is he not also the God of the Gentiles? Yes, of the Gentiles also. Now, you know, that wasn't the concept back in the Old Testament, was it? Oh, the Gentiles were in God's mind, but you remember what I've always shown you in Ephesians 2 when Paul says, remember that when you were in your uncircumcision, you were strangers from the covenants of promise. You were aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, without hope and without God in this world. That was the Gentiles' lot back there before the gospel of grace came along. But see, now it's on a level, I've used the word before, I use it again, we're now on a level playing field. The Jew has no advantage over the Gentile. We have no advantage over the Gentile, or over the Jew. So then, seeing, verse 30, it is one God who shall justify the circumcision or the Jew by faith, and put in the word justify, and he will justify the uncircumcision, the Gentile, through faith. Now a lot of people get picky here and they'll say, well, now what's the difference by faith and through faith? And I simply say, none. It's the same thing. You're going to be saved by faith, you're going to be saved through faith, but whatever, there is no difference. A Jew is saved on the same basis that a Gentile is, and that is faith in the finished work of the cross. There can be nothing added to it. All right, now then verse 31. I hope I can do it a justice in 1 minute. Do we then make void the law through faith? In other words, when I stand here and say you're not under law, you're strictly by faith plus nothing, does that mean you throw the law out and to the wind? No. When we get to Romans chapter 13, Paul's going to say just as plain as English can make it, that when we love our neighbor, as a believer of course, we fulfill the what? The law. See? We don't cast it out. And I've always put it this way, just look at it for a few seconds. Can you love someone and break any of those commandments against him? It's impossible. And so love is the fulfilling of the law.
Thank you for watching Through the Bible with Les Feldick, a weekly Bible study. If you would like more information about the Les Feldick Ministries, a Bible study in your area, or about this program, write to Les Feldick Ministries, Route 1, Box 760, Kinta, Oklahoma, 74552. That's Route 1, Box 760, Kinta, Oklahoma, 74552. Through the Bible with Les Feldick is viewer-supported, and your gift is appreciated. Thank you, and be sure to tune in next time for Through the Bible with Les Feldick.